Hey guys, it's me. I'm sorry. I just thought I was kind of compelled to talk about some things this morning because I just watched a very emotional video that I posted on my channel about or from Terry Crews. You may know him as an actor and a personality, um, and it just hit me hard. Really, really fucking hard because he talked about abuse in his family and I just started thinking back about a lot of memories, and I felt like talking about it this morning because sometimes this can be a therapy, and yeah. So that's just a little intro. I've been kind of crying and everything, remembering things back, and I really want to make this as far as introspection and letting you know who I am and where I grew up and what I went through in the beginning of my life, and kind of where it led to, my thinkings and mentalities later. So give me just 1 second. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I had to get a little something to wipe the snot off my face because I don't know how things are going to go with this. Because I may be talking about a lot of fucked up shit that happened during my childhood and growing up and just kind of reflecting. And I think it's important this morning, with a day of possible very big changes coming in my life later on, making some decisions, very deep decisions coming up. And this also helps me as a therapy to watch it back and kind of see myself and analyze myself and things like that, self-analyzation and all that. And I'm going to put this with the story of my life, kind of a video biography, I guess, and this is just kind of a spur of the moment. But essentially, this also may go for some of my family members who are unaware of what it was like growing up in my household. Some of them I've talked to it about, but some of them have no idea. Because one cousin in particular hasn't been in my life in a very long time, and she missed a lot of years of what was going on. And this may contextualize some choices I made later, to where, they didn't understand. Like, for example, not being there when my father died and all that stuff. So essentially, where to begin? My dad, more or less, to sum it up and try to keep it as quick as possible. I grew up very poor, very broke, and we never had a lot of money and or resources in my household. My mother was a CNA and a college graduate in chemistry, or at least, she had a 2-year degree in chemistry, and she worked as a chemist for a long time before going into nursing and stuff like that. My father was a poor, uneducated guy, backwards thinking, came from one of the worst places you could possibly imagine as far as intellectualism and all that stuff. He wasn't the smartest man on earth. He never really progressed. He was coddled by his mother, but he tried, I guess. I guess that's all I could say about it. So coming into that, I just wanted to give you that as kind of a prerequisite to later revelations and why it made sense to me. Revelations by my mother and father, either done in madness or done in simple anger and rage towards the only thing that was there for them to take their anger and rage out on, which was me. Now, bearing in mind that this goes into the context of abuse. Abuse is not always, majority of the abuses I've faced in my life have not been physical. Now, with that being said, my grandfather used to whip us with switches if we did bad, but not repetitively or what I would consider overly done. Like, if we did legitimately do something bad, he would give us a whipping with a switch, and I didn't consider that, and I still don't consider that abuse. I considered that discipline, and he didn't do it all the time. He just did it once in a blue moon whenever we did something very bad. My father, though, grew up in that environment, and he took everything my grandfather did to him the wrong way, and they may have had a whole history I'm unaware of, but my grandmother was always the one to coddle him. And in that, she led to him having a fucked up, twisted ideology of the world. He was very misogynistic. He was very exploitative in some degrees. He did a lot of things, but yet he had this conflicting moral interest of religious ideologies, I guess, or something that caused him to stay and participate in being a dad or whatever in my life as much as he could, which was, whenever he wasn't erratically spending all of our money, he was, doing other things to make a detriment to the household. My father was a very explosive personality. He would always yell and scream at the drop of a hat. He would flip out. He didn't know how to emotionally deal with things. Like, he had road rage, everything. Some of my earliest memories of my dad were driving down the road in the middle of Charlotte through gang territories and him screaming, literally yelling at cars of black dudes wearing gang bandanas, "Go fuck yourself," and "Stupid motherfucker this," and he had no control when it came to rage. Like, he would just fucking drop at the dime of a hat. But yet he never physically abused me. He never hit me or hurt me or anything like that. All his shit was mental. Screaming, yelling. I mean, if there was a day when my mother and father didn't argue, I could not remember the days where there wasn't an argument in my household or screaming or yelling. Every day was screaming, yelling, hatred. "I hate you, bitch. I hope you die, bitch. You're a Nazi, bitch. You're a German Kraut, bitch." It just fucking weird shit. My mother and father were probably the two most opposite people you could ever possibly imagine. Hand to God. One thought this, one thought that. I mean, if there was an issue, my mother and father were at the fucking extreme ends of every issue you could possibly imagine. From race to other things. I mean, how the fuck these two people got together is simple once you understand the story. Essentially, my mother and father got together, and my mother at the time was hanging out in bars when her and my father met. My mother was married once before she met my father. She was married to a man who was a good man. His name was Jay. And they had a very good relationship, but it ended. And oddly enough, Jay ended up later on losing a leg and becoming an amputee, but that's relative to later parts of the story. And she got divorced. The marriage ended, and that was that. Now, if that was the decision for them to stay, maybe, I don't know. And then I think my father was married before and got divorced. I can't remember exactly if he was. We didn't talk about it much. But I'm fairly certain maybe my dad was married. I don't think he was, but he may have been. A lot of my history has been, a lot of these stories and a lot of these things have been kind of lost in time with the wellspring or the fucking shit of my life to where I didn't remember or lost memories because of traumas or whatever. But, my mom was divorced. My dad was, what he was. And they were just hanging around in bars, meeting people to fuck and socialize and all that stuff. People were amorous back then. They got together, smoked weed, hung out, had sex, and then, babies were made. This was probably, somewhere in the early 80s. I was born in 82. So this is maybe, 81, 80, whenever they started first hooking up. Now, my mother coming out of a previous marriage and everything like that, I'm sure didn't want to get married again so soon. I'm sure my father had no inkling of getting married, and they were just going out having fun because, honest to God, like both of their families together, if they ever, if they met and had interactions, the shit would have never worked. Now, but that being said, essentially later on in my life, my mother and father made it very clear to me that I was a mistake. I was never meant to be. I was never intended to be born. I was never intended to be made. I was a mistake. I was a drunken night of whiskey, weed, whatever the fuck they had going on whenever they were partying, and that was it. And in that ideology, in that knowledge, you can kind of understand at least I do. I understand why they treated me the way they did. Meaning, I was treated more as a burden rather than a loved child. I was treated more as an obligation rather than a child. You see what I'm saying? Like, my mother and father got together and stayed together for the only reason of obligation to me. That was it. Obligation to raise a kid. That's it. And trust me, they made that perfectly and abundantly clear millions of times before that, in one way or another, that I was nothing more than an obligation. Whenever I would get clothes or she would have to buy clothes for me for school, I was told I don't have the money for this shit, basically, and in very passive aggressive, roundabout ways, I was shown my entire life in one way or another that I wasn't something they made from love. I was something that was made as a mistake. And in that, because of religious beliefs or other beliefs or just looking back at it in context, there was a lot of things that kept my parents together that weren't love. It wasn't love. There was no fucking love there, trust me. Any chance they got from the earliest memories as a child, the only thing I remember is hearing them screaming at each other to the top of their lungs and being terrified that they were about to kill each other. That's how bad it sounded. Later on in life, that was the first 12 or 13 years of my life, was just this constant shit show. Never having enough money for anything. My dad would go out and blow all the money he made or she made or whatever on bullshit. Trust me, the money between my mother and father that they made, they should have been well and truly financially secured for the rest of their lives by the time they were, 10 years into the marriage. But that's not how it happened. Shit just went off the rails. My dad went into truck driving and everything like that. My father ended up becoming an amputee, roundabout when I was 13, 14 years old, if I remember correctly. And my mother was left alone to basically not only deal with my father, who was an amputee, but he hated her. So she was put in this position, and then she had to keep working. Well, later on, years later, my mother would come to be disabled herself through cancer, through a very severe car wreck, a head-on collision that basically left her disabled. And roundabout that time, and roundabout at that point, or at that point rather, I became then the child of two disabled people who did not like each other and hated me. So you can only imagine where it went from there. Looking back on it now, knowing that I was a mistake, knowing, that being told to me with almost a sense of pride that, that was going to hurt me that much, really, really reflected what my path in life was and what damages it did. For the longest time I had, ever since then, it was just shit that happened to me that, made me more and more fucked up. Essentially no confidence, no, inability to see anything in yourself of self-worth, all that shit. And years later, mental stains would come back to, haunt me. In my suicide attempt, because that's what inevitably led me to the road of suicide, is because that value of a human being was already destroyed years ago. And I mean, when you take a young mind and you put it in an environment of constant hatred and arguments and all this stuff, it's a wonder how I came out to be, anything short of sane, to be honest with you. And essentially when my mother and father both became disabled, despite what anybody in my family or otherwise may say, friends could attest to this, there was no help. There was no help for us. There was no families coming together and helping us out. There was no, we're going to come and help you or take care of things. Now, whether that was my mom and dad's decision or somebody else's, I don't fucking know. We were pretty much left to die. Meaning, you know, this is your shit, deal with it, go fuck yourselves. Now, on my mom's side of the family, there was a lot of progressive and accepting people of not only my dad, but, you know, his family ideologies, which they never knew much about. Like, somehow these two families were kept far away from each other. And that was by choice, I feel, because a lot of it was these two families were completely different. And maybe behind closed doors there was discussions about what I was to the family and who I was. I don't know. I wasn't part of those discussions, but a lot of shit was very apparent. Like, for example, one of my aunts on my dad's side, I know religiously fucking hates me. And that's fine. I religiously fucking hate her too. Because growing up, all I ever saw from her was, I'm better than you, higher than you, and my shit doesn't stink. And that's fine. You know, she never reached out. She never, and she was the type to never reach out and never have the talk. She wanted you to come to her on her terms and fucking cow down to her and worship her, and I ain't about that. My mother wasn't about that either. That's why she didn't like the bitch either. And that's why the bitch wasn't at my mother's funeral, because she looked down on my mother. And that was very apparent and clear through the history of my life and the, you know, Montgomery family, my dad's side of the family, which is fine. You know, I mean, we're adults. We could talk about it now, and I could give a fuck less what she thinks or where she's at. Her daughter was the only thing that I really cared about, and it's a tragedy what happened to her. But you know, that was the case, and it was like I was trapped in a situation where my mother and father were both disabled, hated each other, and I was the punching bag. Not physically, but mentally. Mentally, I was the one to catch all the shit that they couldn't cast on each other. And I was locked in this situation for years. I didn't have a roadmap or anybody around me providing a roadmap or any kind of guidance to where I needed to be. I was left alone to deal with it and, you know, make things happen that a young person can't figure out. And it destroyed me. I mean, it really did. I mean, to be honest with you, you know, my suicide was considered a collapse by me, but honestly, that was probably not where the collapse began. It was probably the end of it, where the collapse began when I was 16 or 17 years old, and it just took 10, 15 years for it to manifest into that day, or those moments. And that's fine. That's the fucking way it is. You know, I mean, that's life. You know, it ain't about what's happened to you, it's about what you make from it. You know, and what I've made from it, humbly, I can say is that I've came out the other side stronger and better for it. Pressure makes diamonds, not hugs. Pressure and time make diamonds, not hugs. And quick rewards. Okay, that's another lesson for you kids. My mother would die. My father would die. I wasn't there for my dad's funeral, but you know, and I wasn't there for his death, and I wasn't there for the last moments of his life. Something I am ashamed of, but something that I'm not sorry for, because to be honest with you, my dad made it perfectly clear after my mother died that he fucking hated me. And to make it perfectly clear to you, whoever the fuck you are watching this, family or not, the shit wasn't okay. My mom and dad were good about keeping up appearances when we would get together for family gatherings, but it was never okay. Shit was never okay at home. Shit was never going good. Shit was never, ever secure or stable. Our life was a perpetual wheel of chaos, debt, and credit. Mishandled, mismanaged, man. And I came out of it with a lot of understandings of who the fuck I am. And a very, some would say, dark and not forced optimistic perspective on life that you know, I feel is realistic. That, you know, you don't mean shit. I mean, really, the out there in the world, you hear lies and myths, and you're lucky to find a couple of people who actually genuinely fucking care about you. A couple of people, a handful of people if you're fucking lucky. The rest of them, it's a bag of fucking lies. It's a bag of fucking bullshit that they feed you to get something off of you or something like that. And those people, those handful of people, man, you better fucking hold on to them for dear life. And if you find real, true, genuine people in your life that are good people, you better fucking hold on to them for dear fucking life. Because it doesn't come every day and it doesn't happen every day. And, you know, thinking back on it, you know, you look back at the life, you know what's happened in your life, and you just think to yourself, you know, would it be different if something different happened? And I say yes, it would have been. I wouldn't be anywhere near as capable as I am now and have the gifts that I was able to, you know, wrought or pull from this fucking shit situation, which is simply a lot of things that, you know, magically led together to create the perfect storm that is me, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not a good person. I mean, you know, I do things for my heart and I do things for people, but that doesn't make me good. That just makes me a human being taking care of human beings. Good is a matter of perspective. And that's what I'm saying, like, good is a skewed perspective. Some people think it's good when you cow down and you become part of the mob. Some people think it's good when you fucking sit there and molest little girls. Some people think it's good when you fucking sit there and get drunk all day and high, and you get the weed, you get the drugs to feed and enable them to be fucking shitty people. Some people think it's good when you give everything you got for everybody else in this world and take nothing for yourself. Good is relative. It's a matter of perspective, just like all things. And I hope today your perspective on me maybe has changed, or you understand me a little bit better. But at this point in my life, I give a fuck less if you understand or care. I can't pay my bills and or survive on caring and understanding. And that's just the way it is. So, I hope you guys take care. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope maybe this tells you how to be brave, and maybe go out there and tell your own story of where you came from and what made you the way you are, and honestly look back on it and reflect on it and say, these are the moments, these chain of events led to me thinking the way I do, and what do I got to do to change it, and what do I got to do to fix myself, because nobody's going to fix you. Only you can fix you. So you have a good day. I love you guys, and you take care, all right?